Hi, everybody. Please let me know in the chat box off to the right-hand side of your screen if you can see me and hear me, just to make sure everything's going smoothly. That would be great. Wonderful. Thanks, Kristen. Great. Okay. Morning, everybody. Well, it's afternoon for me, but looks like we've got people from all over. That's wonderful. Great. Okay. So thank you so much, everybody, for joining in this afternoon. Hopefully we have some individuals with us who have attended the other two sessions in this series. If you have, maybe let me know if you've attended either the fat presentation or the carbohydrate presentation. That would be great. I was really hoping to have lots of people attend all three since we were doing them in a series. So that's great. It looks like a couple of you were here for those ones, so that's awesome. So as you probably know, in that case, this is the last presentation in the macronutrient series, and the one that we have left to do is protein. So we're going to be talking about protein today as our third macronutrients. I see here we have a question from Tasha. Will they be available again? So no, these exact presentations won't be available live again, but they have been recorded and will at some point be posted online. I can send you folks the web page where you can find them online. They won't be posted right away. I don't think they are yet. But I'm going to send you guys a link right now so you can see all the ones that are posted, and mine should be posted shortly. So there's the link. The Kingston base has put it together for us, which is wonderful. And you can find all of our old presentations. They do take a while to get uploaded, so I think the most recent ones aren't there yet. But at some point you will be able to watch the other two and this one from this series, because they are all recorded. So you'll be able to go back and watch them. And there's lots of other great topics in that list. If you are interested in any of them, they've all been recorded from previous seminars, and you can just go back and watch the recording and you'll still get lots out of it, I think. So please feel free to do that as you'd like. Okay, so without much further, like I said, we're going to be talking about protein today as our last macronutrient. For those of you who haven't seen me before, I think probably many of you have. I've been doing this now for a while. Lots of different presentations that we've done, hopefully together. But for those of you who don't know, my name is Madison Walsh. I am a health promotion specialist from CFB Halifax. I'm also a registered dietitian and have a master's of public health degree. So that's my background. I'm super excited to be here with you all today. Looks like we've got people from all over, so that's really great. I love being able to see people come from all over the country. Stephanie, you say there's a problem with some of the recent recording messages saying they're no longer available. What's that link that you just sent there? Eating well during COVID. Oh yes, okay, so those links are the Demio links. Did you get those links from the webpage that I just sent? That's interesting. That's a really good question. I do see that some of them are working, but maybe some of them are not. I don't know why that would be. It's possible that that just means they put in the wrong link. They accidentally put in the registration link instead of the recording link. So thank you actually for pointing that out. I will certainly let them know up at headquarters, and hopefully they can fix that. Was that the only one, Stefan, that you saw? Hopefully there's not too many that are not good links, but we can definitely do our best to fix that so that you'll be able to see them all. So thanks so much for pointing that out. I appreciate it. Okay. Wonderful. So I guess we'll jump in and get started. Looks like we've got 32 of you attending right now, which is awesome. We actually had a big registration. We had like almost 60 people registered. So hopefully we'll have some more join in. That would be great. But if not, no worries. That's wonderful with those of you that are here now. So before we get started, we just have to go through this information every time. So just to remind you all that the presentation is the intellectual property of the Department of National Defense, so please don't try to reproduce it. In addition, some of the topics of this webinar may be of a sensitive nature, and they're all intended for an adult audience. So if you have kids in your house, then we just ask for parental discretion. My presentations are typically on nutrition and therefore are typically not very sensitive in nature, but please do use your own parental discretion. Also, let's respect each other's privacy in this group. So if anyone shares anything in the chat, just make sure that it doesn't, leave this group, and that we respect privacy in that way. And lastly, like we were just talking about, this webinar, as with all of my other ones, including the 2 in this series on fat and carbs, are posted. I sent you the link up above. If you weren't here when I sent that, it's there in the chat. And so you can go and view those at any time. And please feel free to participate as actively as you wish through the chat function. And we're going to do a few polls as well. So that will help just keep you engaged a little bit and get some information from you. So with that being said, we're going to jump in and do the first poll. So I would just like to know what your affiliation is with the CAF community. So I'm going to make that poll live now. It should appear next to the chat function. And if you could just let us know what your affiliation is, please do know that the answers are anonymous. So your personal information will not be attached to your answer. So we won't know who you are. We just like to know the numbers so that we can make sure that our presentations are targeting the right populations. So that would be great if everyone could answer that. I see we're almost there. We've got 27 out of 32. So please just make sure you let me know. If you don't fall under any of the categories, there is an other if none of those apply to you. So please let us know. That would be wonderful. And that will be open there for people if they join in. We can make sure that we get everyone to answer that. That being said, we also have 2 statistics polls at the end of this presentation. So please don't leave until we've answered those other polls. We just can't do them at the beginning because they're more, questions about how you enjoyed the presentation and how the platform was and all that. So please stick around at the end to make sure that you answer those questions before you leave. It really does help for us in creating new and better presentations. So I'd really appreciate that. Thank you so much. All right. So that kind of brings us right into the presentation. So at this point, I usually turn off my video so that you're not staring at me the whole time. And also it makes the presentation a little bit bigger so that you can read the slides more easily and see the photos. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. You will still be able to hear me and you'll be able to see the slides in a larger format. Keep in mind, at any time, you can ask questions as we go along, and please do so. I'm happy to answer them as we go, and we'll also have time for questions at the end if you have any lingering questions. So feel free to use the chat function as much as you'd like for questions as we go. All right, so off my camera. Oh, here we go. We've got our 3 macronutrients. As I mentioned, we have already done fats, which was done first 2 weeks ago, carbs last week, and now protein. So we're almost done going through each of the 3 macronutrients. Hopefully, if you've been there for some of the other ones, you learned lots about carbs and fat. And now it's time to talk about protein. So that's our plan for the day. So what is protein? If you were here for my other 2 macronutrient presentations, this slide will probably sound pretty familiar, as it's pretty much the same as the other 2. So protein is another one of the 3 macronutrients, and it is a necessary part of our diet, and it provides us with energy. So all 3 of the macronutrients provide us with energy. So they're all similar in that respect, but they do have lots of differences. So these are kind of the things that they have in common, but we're going to dive a lot deeper into what protein is in comparison to what we've discussed with regard to carbohydrates and fat, so that we can kind of differentiate between the 3 by the end of today's presentation. It's also important to note, so for the other 2, I had a separate point that said that they were not all bad for fat and carbs, and I didn't include that point on protein because I do find that generally protein is probably I guess you could say the most well-respected macronutrient, or the most popular one. It doesn't quite get the same bad reputation that carbohydrates and fat have received in the past. Overall, people generally have an understanding that we need protein and that protein is good for you. whereas sometimes people don't necessarily feel that way with carbs and fat. However, I hope that after being present for my other two presentations, you all have a very good understanding that we do need all three, including carbs and fat, and of course protein. But I think for the most part, most people do have an understanding that protein is good. And in fact, a lot of the time people end up eating more protein than they need. So we're going to be talking a lot about that as we go on throughout the presentation today. So keep that in mind. All right, so why is protein important? We'll dive a little more into exactly what protein is and what it does. So some of the main functions of protein include growth and repair of all of your body cells. Essentially, every cell in your body is going to need protein in order to grow and repair itself. It also plays a role in building and repairing your muscles, your organs, your nails, your tissues, your skin, and your hair, as well as many other things. So really all kinds of functions, really important in order to keep your cells healthy and build new cells as you age. Third point, protein is important in the formation of hormones, antibodies, and enzymes. So all of those are really just different types of molecules that play important roles in our body, and in order to form them, we need protein. So hormones, enzymes, and antibodies are all really important for our health. They play a huge amount of different functions, excuse me, in our body. So I won't go into all of the different functions of these three types of molecules, but just know that they're all really important, and in order to form them and have them working properly in our body, we need protein, and it's incredibly necessary to have enough protein for these to function properly. And then the last point, which we also discussed a little bit with carbohydrates and with fat, is that protein helps to keep you full. So as I mentioned, I think in the last presentation when we were talking about fiber, the three main things that play a really big role in helping to keep you feeling full and satisfied are protein, fiber, and fat. So these three types, so that's fat is one of the macronutrients, protein is another, and fiber is a type of carbohydrate. So it's a specific type of carbohydrate. If you missed that presentation, then please feel free to go watch it later on once it's posted, and you'll learn lots about fiber. But protein, in particular, actually takes longer to break down in the body than the other two macronutrients. So it really, what that means is it just takes longer for our bodies to digest protein. So because of that, we end up having a longer lasting energy source, which means that we're feeling full longer. So our bodies have more calories over a longer period of time because of the slow breakdown of protein in our gut. And as a result, we find that we don't get hungry as quickly when we've had a meal or a snack that has protein in it. So that's the reason behind why we want to try to include protein foods in all of our meals and snacks whenever possible as well. Because the more you feel full and satisfied, the less you may end up eating more than perhaps you need, because you're not feeling that you need to eat in excess because you're feeling full. So that's a really great benefit of protein, along with fat and fiber, which also play very similar roles in keeping you feeling full. Okay, so here's some types of foods that include protein. So I've divided it into three different categories. So types of foods that are high in protein, foods that have some protein or moderate protein, and foods that have a little bit of protein. So the high protein foods, I think, are the ones that everybody knows off the top of their head. So that includes all of your meats, so animal meats, red meats, as well as poultry, so your chicken or turkey, for example, and fish, as well as eggs, which are also an animal product, of course, and tofu. So soy products are generally quite high in protein, so that makes them a really great source of protein for vegetarians. And we'll talk a little bit more about the vegetarian or vegan diet in a little bit. But tofu and other soy products are really a great high quality source of protein. Then we have foods that have moderate protein, and these include your legumes, so beans, peas, things like that, your nuts and seeds, nut butters, so peanut butter or almond butter, seeds and seed butters, dairies, so your milk, your cheeses, your yogurt, and soy beverages, so like soy replacements for milk and things like that. So these types of foods would have a fair amount of protein, just not as much as your meat or like animal products or tofu. And then lastly, there are lots of foods that have just a little bit of protein, so not really enough that if you were to eat these foods on their own, you wouldn't get enough protein, but they do help to contribute to your overall protein intake, so it's still important to mention. So a lot of people don't necessarily know that these types of foods have protein in them, but they do, even if in very small amounts. So these types of foods can include whole grains, so your breads or your cereals, rices, whole grain rice, whole grain pasta. Quinoa is a pretty high protein grain, barley as well. And then, of course, we have your fruit and vegetables. So generally, we talk about fruit and vegetables in the carbohydrate section, and we did that quite a bit of that last week. But fruit and vegetables do also have a very little amount of protein. Certain vegetables have more protein than others. So for example, some vegetables that have, slightly higher amounts of protein in comparison to others would include things like broccoli, spinach, asparagus, artichokes, even potatoes have a little bit of protein, Brussels sprouts. So in general, it's really like those dark leafy greens or just the dark green vegetables that tend to have more protein. So keeping that in mind when you're making your vegetable choices, particularly if you are following a vegetarian or a vegan diet, making sure to include those higher protein vegetables is a really great way to supplement your protein intake throughout the day. All right, so what about Canada's Food Guide? So I've talked about Canada's Food Guide before. If you're not familiar with it, I am going to show you the image a little bit later today of what the new Canada's Food Guide looks like. But first, I just want to talk only about protein. So in the updated Canada's Food Guide, it came out in 2019, so just last year, we have a new version. And in this version, we follow what they call the plate method. So we have a plate, and the plate is divided into 3 sections. So half of your plate should be filled with fruits and vegetables, half of your plate should be filled with protein foods, and the other half should be filled with whole grain. So we want to, or sorry, I just realized my mistake there. So it's half and a quarter, my mistake. So half vegetables, 1/4 protein, and 1/4 grains. Sorry for any confusion there. We can't have 3 halves, obviously. So the quarter of the protein foods is really what I want to focus on here. So when they use the term protein foods, they are including, just go back a slide, all of these different types of foods that we've discussed as sources of protein. But they also do put an emphasis on plant protein. So you can see here I have a picture of the animal protein versus a picture of the plant types of protein. And Canada's Food Guide does encourage that as much as possible, we consume plant-based protein as our kind of go-to source of protein, and then sort of have animal protein when desired or when needed as a supplement, or if you enjoy it, that sort of thing. But trying to focus on increasing our plant protein is a really important highlight of the new version of Canada's Food Guide. So if we go back a slide again, those types of protein, we would be excluding in that category of plant protein, we would be excluding anything that's an animal source. So your meats, poultry and fish and eggs, but you would be including your tofu, your legumes, nuts and seeds. You could include the milk and cheese in a vegetarian diet, but not in a vegan diet, and they would still classify as animal sources, so not as a plant source, but they wouldn't count as meat, obviously. And then soy products, so soy beverages, along with tofu, would qualify as plant proteins. And then, of course, a few of them would be for small sources of protein. We would have your whole grains, your fruits and vegetables, and things like that. So those would be really the types of protein that Canada's Food Guide is referring to when they talk about putting plant protein as a priority over animal protein. So that's just something to keep in mind. Everybody has their own preferences. Personally, I do eat animal protein. Some choose not to. Perfectly fine. There's nothing wrong with choosing either way, as long as you have an understanding that you need protein in your diet one way or the other. So we're going to talk about how to make sure that you're getting enough, whether you're following a diet that includes animal-based protein or if you're following a vegan or vegetarian diet. Either way, perfectly fine and can be a very healthy diet either way, as long as you are consuming adequate protein. That's really the important part of this topic. All right, so what exactly is protein made of and kind of how is it structured? So I'm sure you've all probably heard of the term amino acids. So amino acids are basically the building blocks of protein. So protein is made up of multiple amino acids in large chains. So I put the little chemical structure of an amino acid down there. Probably doesn't mean a lot to many of you unless you've taken multiple chemistry courses, but it's just more just so that we can understand that it is basically just a molecular structure, chemical structure that has the name amino acids. So proteins are made up of multiple of these little structures, and we call them amino acids. So there are 20 different types of amino acids, and if you look there at the structure, they all have the same backbone, but where you see the little R at the bottom, that's the part that changes on each different amino acid. So they have different groups that are attached to them where the R is, and that is how we differentiate between the 20 different types of amino acids. So within these 20 types, our bodies are capable of producing some of these amino acids, but not all of them. There are some that are not able to be produced inside of our bodies, which means that we need to get these types of amino acids from our diet because our bodies do require all 20 amino acids, but we can only make 11 of them. So that means that there are 9 types of amino acids that we have to make sure we include in our diet. And these are called the essential amino acids. So all of the amino acids are technically essential because we do need them all in order to stay alive. But the good news is that our body can make 11 of them. So although they are still necessary, we don't call them essential because we don't need to eat them. We are capable of creating them. And that's really the reason behind that name. So there are 9 amino acids that are necessary for us to eat, and we need to make sure that we're eating all of them. So we'll talk a little bit about how we can do that and how do you make sure that you're eating all of these 9 essential amino acids. So what does that look like in terms of the types of food that you are eating? So we'll dive a little bit deeper here, and we're going to talk about complete versus incomplete protein. You may have heard these terms before, and it can be a little bit confusing, but hopefully we'll be able to clarify any questions that we have regarding this concept. So when we hear the term complete protein, we're referring to a protein that has all 9 of the essential amino acids. So every single one of those amino acids that your body requires to take in through your food, this type of food, if it's complete protein, that means that it has all 9 of those amino acids. So for the most part, complete proteins come from animal sources. So that's where your meat, your poultry, your fish, your eggs, and your dairy, that's where those foods come in. So generally, if you're eating a diet that includes meat or animal sources of protein, even if it's not meat and only eggs and dairy, if you're a vegetarian, then you're probably getting adequate amounts of complete protein because you're having those sources that provide all of your amino acids. However, if you're following a vegetarian diet, it can be a little bit more difficult to make sure that you're getting all 9 of the amino acids, which we're going to talk about here in a second. There are a few plant products that are also complete proteins, so that's really good news. So there's certain types of foods that you can eat that will provide you all amino acids that don't come from animals. And some examples of those types of foods would include quinoa, tofu or tempeh, so soy products like that, hemp seeds, and chia seeds, just as a few examples. So these types of foods are really great vegetarian or vegan sources of complete protein. But of course, we can't live off just those foods. So if someone was a vegetarian or vegan, they would still need to make sure that they're getting enough of these complete proteins, probably because they wouldn't likely be able to get enough just from eating those few types of foods because those foods you're not likely to eat, every single day. So how exactly would someone, do that, and what would that look like? And we're going to find out here in a second. I see here Michael has a question about whether or not there's a planned vegan or vegetarian webinar. To my knowledge, I don't think that there is. However, if that's something that people are interested in, I certainly could look into that possibility. If there's maybe some other people, if anyone else on the line is interested in that, let me know. And we could definitely look into that. Okay, wow, looks like lots of people. Wonderful, okay. So that's definitely an option. I can look into it. I do have a different webinar planned for next week. But if all of you are interested in a vegan or vegetarian, I guess maybe we can even just call it plant-based diet, then maybe I can plan that for 2 weeks from now. That would be kind of a fun one. So I will look into that. And if you see it come up in the schedule, then you guys can join me. That would be great. Awesome. Okay, so we'll continue on. And there are going to be quite a few more discussions about vegan and vegetarian diets in this session. So if you feel like you still have questions, then let me know and we can plan one. But maybe you'll feel like everything that you need to know is answered by the end of this one. And if that's the case, then that would be great too. So let me know at the end what you think, and we can decide whether or not we need another one. That would be awesome. Okay, wonderful. So here we go. So moving on now to incomplete proteins. So when we say an incomplete protein, what we mean is that this type of protein source has at least one essential amino acid, but it may not have all of them, or it may have what we call a limiting amino acid. So when a protein source has a limiting amino acid, it means that that source is a bit lower in one particular essential amino acid. So it's just not a really great source of maybe one or more of the essential amino acids. So unlike your complete proteins, it doesn't have adequate amounts of all of the amino acids in order to qualify as a complete protein. So these types of incomplete proteins are typically found in plant protein sources, with the exception of those plant protein sources that I mentioned earlier that did fall under the complete proteins category. So this does present certain challenges for people who follow a vegan or a vegetarian diet. However, the good news is that most plant proteins still do have all 9 amino acids. So typically they don't actually have 0 of any of them. They may just be particularly low in some of them. So that's good. So you are still getting some of all of them, maybe just not enough. So then people wonder, well, how do you make sure that you're getting all of these essential amino acids? If they're so important, how do you make sure that you're getting them all if you're not eating animal protein? So the answer comes here in what we call complementary proteins. So it's a pretty simple concept, and basically it means that you're combining incomplete proteins to supply a complete protein. So some types of foods that would go well together and complement each other in the types of amino acids that they're providing would be, for example, eating legumes with grains or legumes with nuts and seeds. So you can see here in the photo, we have peanut butter on toast. So peanuts are a legume, and the toast, the whole grain toast, would be a grain. So if you're combining those two, then you actually would be getting all of the essential amino acids by combining these two, because typically legumes are lacking in certain amino acids that the grains make up for, and vice versa. So they kind of complement each other in that way, and they make sure that you're getting all of them when you eat them together. However, this is a bit of an old idea, and it's since been updated, because what we used to think is that you had to make sure that you're always eating complementary proteins at the same time at every meal in order to get the same benefit that you would for eating a complete protein, such as a piece of steak. But the good news is that we've since learned that that's not the case, and there is no need to eat complementary proteins together at every meal, because we now understand that the foods don't have to be eaten exactly at the same time. As long as you eat a wide variety of foods, then you're probably going to be making complete proteins kind of really without thinking of it. So as long as you're having all these different types of plant proteins throughout the day, each day, and making sure that you're having a variety that includes legumes and grains and nuts and seeds as some examples, then you're probably doing a pretty good job of getting all of the different types of essential acids or essential amino acids that your body requires. So that's really nice because it takes a little bit of the pressure off someone who is following a vegan or vegetarian diet from feeling like they always have to make sure they're eating certain categories of food at the same time. They should be able to make sure that their body is getting all of the amino acids as long as they're eating a wide variety of plant-based proteins throughout the day, every day, and just repeating that day in and day out. So that does make it a little bit easier. So that's really the important concept, is that we just want to make sure we're eating a huge variety of protein foods in order to be able to supply all of the essential amino acids, or you follow a diet that has animal proteins, and in that case, you have to worry even less because you know that you're getting all of the essential amino acids in your food every time that your food includes an animal-based protein. So that does certainly make life easier, but I absolutely understand that there are people out there for various reasons that do not eat meat or animal-based proteins. And like I said, that's certainly a personal choice. There's nothing wrong with either decision. It's just important to know kind of the science behind it and to make sure that you're ultimately nourishing your body to the best of your ability. That's what really is important. It's not so much about how, especially when it comes to protein. As long as you're getting everything that you need, that's the important part. All right, so here we go, vegan and vegetarian. I already probably discussed most of this, but just to summarize, absolutely it is possible to get enough protein on a vegan or vegetarian diet. It's a bit of a common myth, especially in people who feel strongly against these types of diets. It's common that people say that you're going to be deficient in protein if you follow a vegan or vegetarian diet, but that's simply not the case. It certainly can be a little bit more difficult to get enough protein, but as long as you're paying attention, and if you're not sure, then you can get advice from a registered dietitian or a healthcare professional. And they can kind of help guide you, but for the most part, it absolutely is possible. You just need to pay a little bit more attention and make sure that you're eating a variety of plant-based protein foods. So I mentioned already some of the different types of sources. I love this picture here on the right because there's so many different types of plant-based proteins that are shown here. So some of the sources include, if you're a vegetarian, then you can still eat animal sources like eggs, cheese, yogurt, and milk. You would just be excluding meat. And if you're a vegan, then you would also be excluding those foods, the eggs, cheese, yogurt, and milk. So some other sources that you would focus on would be your beans, your lentils, legumes, peas, tofu, or other soy products, nuts and seeds, as well as your vegetables and grain products that do contain small little amounts of protein that can help to supplement those extra amino acids that you're after. So absolutely, it's entirely possible. There's lots and lots of information out there on vegan and vegetarian diets. There's also lots of registered dietitians with blogs and information and programs out there that you could get information from. I'm certainly not one that specializes in this, although I do find it very interesting, but there are lots of dietitians who do. If you're interested, I have a friend that I went to university with. Her name is Laura McNeil, and her business is called Tasting to Thrive. She has a great blog, and she is a plant-based focused dietitian and has lots and lots of information on vegan and vegetarian diets and how to include more plant-based protein in your diet if you still do eat meat, or how to transition to that diet if you're interested. I can certainly send you a link to her. Yeah, I will find that right now for you guys and send it if you're interested. I'm in no way affiliating myself with her business, just to clarify. She just is the one that comes to mind when I talk about vegan and vegetarian diets, because I went to the University of Toronto with her, so she also has a master's in public health and is a registered dietitian, and she's really great. She's an awesome lady and really intelligent and has lots of really good experience in vegan and vegetarian and plant-based diets. So if you're interested, there's also lots of other ones out there. I'm not trying to promote her over anyone else. She's just a friend of mine that I happen to know, but do your own research. There's all kinds of excellent dietitians out there if you want to take a look. She's actually based out of Toronto, but she does do virtual counseling, as a lot of them do, especially now that COVID is upon us. So lots and lots of dietitians are doing virtual counseling these days. So it really shouldn't matter where they are. And if you're anywhere in Canada, you should be able to have virtual counseling if that's something that you're interested in. Okay, so moving on, that's pretty much all that I have about vegan and vegetarian diets. So if you do have more questions, or you would be interested in diving a little deeper in it, let me know. We can certainly consider making an entire session on it. Hopefully that did help to answer some of your questions, though. It is a very interesting topic. All right, so here we go. I found this adorable little photo of a squirrel that I just couldn't resist eating his little nut. So he's doing a great job demonstrating eating your protein every day, because we did talk about how peanuts are a great source of protein, and peanut butter and all that. So it's really important that we eat protein every single day. And the reason for that is that our body actually does not have the capacity to store protein the same way that it has the ability to store fat or to store carbohydrates. So we talked about both of those processes and how our body can store excess fat. It can store a bit of excess carbohydrate up to a certain point. After that, it would then store carbohydrate as excess fat, but it can still store some. But in the case of protein, we can't really store any excess protein. So it's important to eat a variety of protein sources every day and meet our needs every day, because we can't really have a backup. If we were to need more protein, then our body would probably start to break down our muscle tissue, or our lean tissue as it's called, and that's definitely not something that we want. We do not want our muscles to start to be broken down. We want to just provide our body with protein through our diet in the correct amounts every day, because we know that we can't store it, so we don't have that backup storage that we do for the other macronutrients. So definitely want to make sure that we're consuming it every single day. That being said, we're going to move on here in a second and talk about supplements. And this is a really common question and discussion around protein is, okay, well, if I can't store protein, I should probably just eat a lot of it to make sure that I'm getting enough. So maybe I should take a protein supplement. So we've got a whole slide here, and we're going to talk about why that's not necessarily a good idea. So protein supplements are actually one of the most popular sports supplements in the world, well, in North America for sure. So they're very, very commonly used, and more so than really any other supplement that's intended to increase your performance in sports, or even just in life. Some people will just take a protein supplement, even if it's not for activity. Sometimes they just think they need extra protein because they want to make sure that they're getting enough. So the good news is that most people who do consume a balanced diet, and that's either on a vegetarian or vegan diet, or on a diet that includes animal sources, either one, it can absolutely be a balanced diet in either case, these individuals do not require a protein supplement. So for the most part, it's very unlikely, and of course I don't know each of you individually, so I would never say for each of you that this applies. You would have to go see a registered dietitian or a doctor to confirm any of this, because this is certainly not individualized counseling. But for the most part, as a general sweeping statement, most of us probably do not require a protein supplement, because we can easily get enough protein from eating protein-rich foods, and there's so many different types of foods that have protein. We've talked about them earlier in this presentation. Even if you're eating animal sources or plant sources, either way, there's so many options. There's so many great types of foods that have protein that it's actually quite easy to make sure that you're getting enough. So it's really not something that you should worry about. So I did say earlier that we want to make sure we eat protein every day, and that we want to make sure we get enough, but for the most part, we all already do get enough. It's something that most people eat plenty of, if not too much of. So there's really not much to worry about. So like I said, we can't store it, so we don't want to eat extra, because if we do eat extra protein, then unfortunately our body automatically converts that to fat because it has no other way to store it. The only way that we can is by converting it to fat and then storing it as fat. So for the most part, I would suspect that that's probably not something that many people want in this world of many people trying to lose weight rather than gain weight. Not that you necessarily need to do that, but for the most part, we probably want to avoid having excess protein turned into excess fat, because for most of us, that's not necessary. And in fact, maybe an undesired effect. So it's something that's kind of a bit counterintuitive, because I feel that most people who turn to protein supplements are likely individuals who are trying to gain muscle or get more fit or work out a lot at the gym. But little do they know that if they're eating excess protein more than meets their needs, which they probably are if they're also eating a balanced diet that includes either animal-based protein or plant-based protein, then they're almost certainly getting more than they actually need, which means that that excess protein is then converted to excess fat, which then they have to go and burn off at the gym. So it's really quite counterintuitive or counterproductive. And it's really not the desired effect when we are looking to take protein supplements. So I would say the takeaway is that most of us don't need them. And the other thing is that they're really expensive. It costs a lot of money to buy these supplements, and you go through them pretty quick because the package usually tells you to use like 2 full scoops in all your smoothies every single day, twice a day, or whatever it may be. So it's a lot of money, and for the most part, that money is really just going down the drain because it's not something that you need in order to be healthy. So that's my little rant on supplements. So when we kind of loop that all the way back, oh, actually, sorry, I'm going to say one more thing here about protein supplements, because I just remembered. I am doing my presentation next week on sports supplements. We'll also talk about energy drinks. We will talk more about protein supplements as well. So I'm going to put a live registration button here. If you're interested, I'm going to share that now while I'm thinking of it. You can click that button there, and we're going to be talking about more sports supplements and the science behind them, and whether or not they're necessary or whether they're helpful when you're being physically active. So if that's something that you're interested in learning more about, then please register at that link, and I will see you next week to talk about that. It's going to be a good one, I think. So please feel free to join me. That would be great. Okay. So I think that's all I wanted to say there, and we'll move on now. Okay, so that brings us back to Canada's Food Guide. So we're kind of looping it back now. I did mention Canada's Food Guide in the beginning, and the way that the plate model was divided. Now here you have a visual. So you'll see that the top right corner of the plate says eat more protein foods. So again, just to kind of drive the point home, if we're eating adequate protein foods, either plant-based or animal-based, you are most likely going to get all of the protein, all of the vitamins, all of the minerals that you need in order to make sure that your muscles are growing healthy and strong. So again, no need for extra supplements, no need for additional protein. All we need to do is make sure that we're following a balanced diet and that we're meeting our basic protein needs and not exceeding them. So what does that mean? Oh, shit. Oh, sorry. I don't mean to swear. Here we go. I'm going to skip this slide for now, and I'll go back to it. So I just want to talk about the guidelines. For now, I'm going to get rid of the sports supplement window because I think it's probably in the way of your slides because it is on mine. If you want it back later, I'll put it back up. Actually, it might just be there. Anyway, I kind of minimized it there for now. Okay, so protein guidelines. So what does that mean? How much protein should we be consuming? So overall, protein should provide 10 to 35% of the total calories. And when we look more specifically about kind of grams of protein, most adults should be consuming approximately 0.8 grams of protein for every kilogram of body weight. So if you're interested in doing a little math, most of you probably know your weight in pounds. If you do know it in kilograms, great. If not, you can convert it to kilograms pretty quickly using Google on your phone or your device. Once you know your weight in kilograms, all you have to do is then multiply that weight in kilograms by 0.8. So 0.8 multiplied by whatever your body weight is, and that will let you know how many grams of protein you should be having per day, which is a really interesting exercise. You don't need to share your answer with us or anything, of course, but it's good to kind of have a general idea of how much protein you need. And then you can start paying more attention about how much protein is in the different foods that you buy. You can read the food labels. If you want to learn more about food labels, I did do a presentation on food labels that should be posted on that website that I sent earlier. So you can learn more about it there, and you can watch your, yeah, okay, thank you for the conversion there. Pounds over 2.2 is kilograms, exactly. Okay, Tony, great question. I was kind of just about to get there, actually. Wonderful. So it generally is, it depends on your definition of very physically active. So it's possible for athletes that amount, the 0.8 grams, could go up to approximately 2 instead of 0.8 if you're kind of an extreme athlete. So it could be anywhere in between 0.8 and 2 grams per kilogram, depending on your level of activity. And of course, that's a very individualized thing, and we could spend quite a while discussing your level of activity. But if you're curious, you could make a range for yourself and do 0.8 and then do 2 and know that it's probably somewhere in between there. But if for it to be 2 grams per kilogram, you'd pretty much want to be like a marathon runner or something like that, because that's kind of the highest end. So for most people, we don't do that much activity. So it would be somewhere in between, kind of depending on how you feel your active level is. So hopefully that helps clarify that. So if you do feel that you're a little more active than the average person, it would probably be a little bit higher than 0.8. If you think that you're, an elite athlete, then it would probably be closer to 2 grams per kilogram. All right. Awesome. Okay. So we're going to go back here just really quickly. So where should we focus? So these are the different types of protein foods that we want to focus in on for our health, kind of how to eat protein in order to be the most healthy that we can be. So the greatest sources of protein in terms of providing you optimal nutrients and eliminating, the more negative types of foods that can provide, extra saturated fat or things like that. So for example, red meat has more saturated fat than leaner meats like poultry or fish. So we want to focus more on those leaner meats just in order to have less saturated fat. And if you're curious about the differences in types of fats, you can go back and watch my fat presentation from 2 weeks ago. So we also want to focus on lots of plant-based sources of protein. So nuts and seeds, legumes, soy products like tofu or tempeh, lean meats, like I said, poultry or fish. Dairy products are a great source of protein, and eggs are also really great. And those last few there are, of course, only if you're including animal sources in your diet. So those are just some really nice, strong sources of protein that are optimal for health. That's not to say that anything that's not on this list is not something that you should be included in your diet. It just means that it may not be as high in protein, or it may be a slightly less nutritious source of protein, but certainly not necessarily something that you need to not include. These are just some of the best sources of where you can get your protein. Okay, so back to this slide here for a second. We now should have a general idea of how many grams of protein that we need. However, a really important point to make here, and I mentioned this at the beginning, is that most North Americans consume far more protein than we need. So there's a good chance that you already eat more than the 0.8 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight than you require. So actually, recent studies have shown that most of us may even, or many of us may even consume more protein than even an elite athlete would need. So some of us might even actually be consuming more or equal to the 2 grams per kilogram rather than the 0.8 that would be actually more appropriate for our needs. So all that to say, it's not necessarily to say that you should start cutting out protein from your diet, because that's not necessarily the best approach. We just want to make sure that we want to not overeat in our protein, and also acknowledge that there really truly is no need for most of us to have a protein supplement, because most of us are already eating more than a typical athlete needs anyway. So there's really no need for those extra sources. Of course, there's certain times when someone would need a supplement, like if you're in the hospital or if you're unable to chew or consume food orally, then yes, of course, you might need, you know, a liquid protein shake or something like that. But for the most part, you can get all the protein that you need from eating a healthy, balanced diet, which is a wonderful thing because it tastes so much better anyway. Most of our protein supplements or protein bars or protein shakes actually don't taste very good at all. So really important to keep in mind. I see, Lisa, you've added there that portion size makes a huge difference. You are absolutely right. A lot of people find it really shocking to learn that the recommended portion size for a piece of meat, as an example, should be approximately the size of a deck of cards for one serving of meat on a plate. But like you're saying there, Michael, the restaurants or even at home, you're likely to put like sometimes like triple that amount of meat on your plate, and many of us would eat that kind of in a heartbeat without really even thinking about it. So that's just something to be a little bit more aware of, is that we probably are eating more protein than we actually need. I see there's another question here from Kristen. What is the conversion of carbs and fats that adults need per day? So it actually isn't quite as simple for carbs and fats. There is no easy conversion for like grams per kilogram as there is for adults. But if you want to go back and watch my other presentations, if you weren't there for them, you'll see that there's certain percentage of calories, same with the protein that you need, but it's not quite as easy of a conversion. It's not really dependent on your weight in the same way that it is for protein. So unfortunately, this type of calculation doesn't really apply to those two macronutrients. All right. Okay, so that actually wraps us up. I think that's the shortest webinar I've done so far. I'm learning to talk a little bit less, I guess, because normally I like to chat a lot, but I don't want to take up too much of your time. So thank you so much, everyone, for coming. I appreciate, it looks like all of you have stuck around. So we are going to do 2 more polls for statistics purposes. Once those are done, I will take any other questions that you have. We can have a discussion. Let me know if you still think that you would like a presentation on vegetarian or vegan diets. Let me know if you're still curious about that. We'll do it. And any other questions, I'd be happy to answer. So here we go. This first poll is whether or not you feel that you can apply what you learned today in your daily living. So that one is going live now. Let me know your thoughts. Keep in mind the most negative answers are at the top, positive at the bottom, because there has been some confusion over the location of answers in the past. Wonderful. Give you a few more seconds to answer that one. I see we have 35 of you here and only 27 have answered. Make sure you answer if you haven't already. It's really helpful to have this information for all of the attendees. I really do appreciate getting all of the feedback that we can. And while we're waiting for those last few to answer that one, we'll jump to the next one. So Demio is the platform that we've been using to present all of these webinars. So with reference to this particular presentation, we'd love to know how satisfied you are with this platform and how well it went for you. So if you had any technical difficulties with it or whatever, then maybe let us know by saying that you weren't super satisfied. But if everything went smoothly, then that's really great, and we'd like to know that as well. So that poll is now also going live. If you could share that with us. Again, negative answers are at the top, positive at the bottom. Also, if you still have not answered the very first poll, it looks like everyone has, I think, but there is one more there about your affiliation with the CAF. If you haven't answered that, then let us know that as well. Awesome. Okay. Really appreciate those answers there. Looks like there's still a few people that haven't answered these other 2, so please do if you still have not. Last slide here is just a list of resources. If you feel that you need help or further support, especially during this difficult time, but these are also available to you anytime. there's lots of numbers that you can call for additional support in these difficult times. So please do feel free to make use of these numbers or websites. This slide, if you want to take a picture of it, please do, in order to make sure that you remember those numbers. So I'll give you a moment. If you'd like to take a photo to remember them and use them in future, then you absolutely can do that. And that brings us to the end of our, well, the end of our protein presentation, but also the end of our macronutrient series. So we've done all 3 macronutrients now. Hopefully you learned lots about the macronutrients. And I will take any other questions that you might have. Let's see, we've got a few comments here. Would still be interested on vegetarian diets. Other aspects of diet in addition to protein. Yeah, absolutely. Okay. Presentation on eating vegetarian would be appreciated. Okay, good. So it sounds like still a few people are interested in a vegetarian diet presentation. So I will certainly look into making that a possibility. I will propose it as a topic and see how that goes. And if it gets approved, then maybe we'll be able to do that in about 2 weeks. So that would be lots of fun. I really appreciate everyone joining in with me today. Thanks so much. And hopefully we'll see you next week for my presentation on sports supplements. And that should be fun as well. I think I just had I think there's 2 questions here. Tasha, how much red meat is too much and how much deli meat is too much? There's really no specific answer to those questions. It's difficult to put a number on it. There's no specific amount that's necessary to follow for every single person in the same amounts. However, keep in mind that these types of meats like red meats and deli meats are higher in saturated fat. So essentially we just want to focus on limiting them and prioritizing meats that are lower in saturated fats, like all the different types of meats that I talked about, your leaner meats like fish and poultry. So there's really not necessarily, an easy answer. There's no place that we draw the line for what's too much or what's too little. For a lot of these things, it can be really individualized. If it's something you enjoy, then, you should enjoy it every now and then, whether that's once a week or once a month or once a year. It's really up to you and how much you feel that you should be consuming. Okay, another question there, Andrew. Because of water pollution, should we limit the amount of fish and seafood in our diets? Excellent question. I don't feel that I'm a super expert in the environmental side of things. I'm a dietitian, so I'm more focused on the nutritional side of things. And from the nutritional side of things, fish and seafood is an excellent source of many, many important nutrients. So it's a really great part of our diet. However, I do acknowledge that because of pollution, I know there's also concerns about mercury with fish, that people are saying that maybe we should limit the amount of fish or seafood. The general recommendation that I continue to see in the literature and continue to hear from my colleagues is that we still should be including fish and seafood in our diets. Smaller fish rather than bigger fish have less mercury, so you can focus on those types of fish that are lower on the food chain for lower amounts of mercury. And of course, we always want to make sure that our fish is fished as naturally as possible. Farmed fish versus fresh fish, or there's a whole debate on all of that sort of thing. But if you are worried about pollution, then maybe you can limit your farmed fish intake and buy your fish from more local sources if that's something that you are concerned about. Again, I'm not an expert in that, so I really don't know exactly what the specific concerns are, but I do know that most dietitians and most of the literature that I continue to read and update myself on still do recommend having fish regularly, if not 2 or 3 times a week. So I would still encourage you to consume it, just because it is such a nutritious source of protein with so many different types of nutrients that can benefit our health in a lot of different ways. All right, let's see here. We have, if you're doing a mix of resistance and cardio training between 1 hour and 2 hours a day at a moderate intensity, what level of protein within that range? That's a very good question, a very specific question. And I don't think that I feel comfortable answering it to that specific of a degree, because it really does depend on you and on your type of training that you're doing, and your body weight and your gender, of course. So it's kind of difficult for me to say that sitting here behind a screen and not being able to actually see you. But I would say you really wouldn't be all that much higher than, yeah, certainly not 2 grams, I would say. But I don't want to give an exact number. I would, if you're really curious about it, then I would say talk to a registered dietitian who can actually give a detailed analysis of your diet and of your training, because obviously I can't do that in my position here, probably in a different province than you and not able to see you or analyze your diet and your training regime. So my recommendation would be either talk to your GP or find a registered dietitian. Like I said, lots of them are doing online counseling. So all it would take is 1 or 2 sessions. Sometimes I think for lots of military members, you probably do have coverage for dietitian services. So you might be able to get in and see someone for free, having it covered, or for very little. But that would be my recommendation, because I don't have quite enough information to be able to answer that specific enough for you, Tony. Hopefully that helps. Okay, well, any other questions? Let's see. Are dietitian available in PSP? So no, I'm not sure what base you're from, Michael. However, I do know that in Halifax, okay, Ottawa, in Halifax, we do have a dietitian, not with PSP. She's a contract employee that works in our hospital. So she is available for military members in Halifax for free, which is awesome. But I do know that not all bases have that. In fact, I think most bases do not have that anymore. So it would be worth looking into. I don't know if Ottawa has it or not. So maybe inquire with your local PSP or your hospital on your base and find out. If not, like I said, there's a good chance that you have dietitian coverage in your medical plan. So I would look in that if you don't have a dietitian available to your base. And there are lots and lots of local dietitians all over Ottawa that would be happy to counsel you virtually or in person once COVID, is a little bit more less of an issue. So yeah, I would recommend that you seek one out that way. Usually in Ontario, you need a referral from a doc. Okay, I didn't know that. I think that's probably, again, I don't know how it works in Ontario, but how it works in Nova Scotia is you only need a referral from a doctor at a hospital if you're going to see the dietitian at a hospital. But there are tons and tons of private practice dietitians, and it's my understanding that if you want to see a private practice dietitian, you can just go see them. And they are also covered in your plan. If you do have that coverage, again, it would depend on your personal plan. But for the most part, I think that you should be able to see a private practice dietitian without a referral from the hospital. At least that's the case in Nova Scotia. So hopefully that's the same in Ontario. And I do see we just have a feedback about Demio. Sounds like we had someone who had to refresh and was kicked out. That's too bad. Okay, well, I'm sorry about that, Joan. Hopefully that won't be a persistent issue. It could just be the Wi-Fi on either end, perhaps, or whatever it may be. So hopefully it's not a persisting issue with Demio, but I am sorry to hear that. But if you do feel that you missed some of the presentation, then once it's posted on that website that I sent at the beginning, you should be able to go in and look at it again and view the parts that you missed. And there we go. We have another comment from Melissa that you can access a dietitian through Public Health or Sobeys and Superstore. That's a really good point too. Yeah, we have the same in Nova Scotia. The Sobeys and Superstore dietitians are really great. And it's a really nice accessible service for everybody. So that's a really good route to go as well if you're looking. Yes, and community health centers as well in Ontario. That's really great. And there's lots of family health teams in Ontario too. So I actually did my internship in Toronto and worked at a family health team with a dietitian. So if you have your GP in a family health team, your doctor, then there actually may be a dietitian with that family health team. And if that's the case, then for the most part, you would just have to ask your doctor for a referral. Most of the time they wouldn't say no because they like to refer to their own dietitian within that health team. And then you'd be able to go see them. And that should be pretty easy for you as well. So if you do have a family health team, then that's a really great way to do it. Unfortunately, we don't have that wonderful type of teams in the same way in Nova Scotia that they do in Ontario, but I really loved the concept of it when I was working in Ontario. It was pretty awesome. Right. Are there any other questions about anything else, protein or otherwise, or dietitian related? Sounds like you guys are pretty interested in seeing some dietitians, which is excellent. I love to see that because, of course, we know lots and lots about food and nutrition. The best resource that you could get if you're interested in this type of thing, that's the best way to find out all the information that you are after is through a dietitian. So that's great. Hopefully you guys are able to do that. Okay, well, if there's no other questions, everyone can feel free to log off. I'll stick around a little while in case there's any lingering questions that you'd like to ask me. But if not, then thanks again so much for joining in today, and hopefully we'll see you next week for my sports supplements presentation. Remember that the registration button is there at the bottom if you are curious to attend that next week. Thanks so much, everybody.